New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
The interview you are about to hear contains subject matter about affective neuroscience. As a companion to our interview, we created a guide designed to help you unlock the power of your mind. Through tailored questions, discover how nurturing care, fear, rage, grief, and joyful play consciously and unconsciously motivate your everyday behavior. Download the guide at transformationandintegration.com/emotions because your growth not only transforms your life, but evolves us all. Together, let's reshape our collective well-being.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Leanne Whitney, guest host working alongside longtime host and producer Jeffrey Mishlove and my other colleagues here at New Thinking Aloud. Today, I am honored to welcome Karl Friston to the show. Karl Friston is widely regarded as one of the most influential neuroscientists of our time. Some peers consider him the foremost neuroscientist in history. His work has garnered significant recognition, with his publications being cited approximately 266,000 times across different platforms at the time of this recording. As a professor at University College London, Friston has made groundbreaking contributions to neuroimaging and theoretical neuroscience. Friston studied physics and psychology at Cambridge University and invented statistical parametric mapping, voxel-based morphometry, and dynamic causal modeling. His most significant contribution, though, is the free energy principle, a foundational framework in neuroscience, stating that biological systems minimize surprise or uncertainty by continuously updating their internal models to predict and adapt to their environment. Friston's work has earned him numerous honors, including the Minerva Golden Brain Award and election as a Fellow of the Royal Society. His achievements span both neuroscience and machine learning, making him a highly respected figure in these fields. Despite the technical complexity of his work, though, it offers profound insights into brain function and has the potential to reshape our understanding of neuroscience, if not the world. In this interview, Karl and I explore the ground of being, attachment theory, safe social engagement, affective neuroscience, the role of joyful play, and the fine line of culture and our adaptation to it. Karl is joining me remotely from his home in the UK, and now I will switch over to the internet interview. Karl Friston, welcome. Thank you for joining us today here at New Thinking Aloud.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Before we get into any theory and discussions about Freud or Helmholtz or free energy principle, could you let our viewers and listeners know a little bit of your backstory?
My backstory is ambivalent or bilateral, depending upon your perspective. So I have a foundation training in both psychology and physics, and then went on to become a medic and specialized in psychiatry. And then was lucky enough to become involved in brain imaging research in the late 90s or early 90s, and then subsequent decades, asking some fundamental questions about how we work, or more specifically, how our brains work, all contextualized by my experience as a psychiatrist. So always maintained a special interest in schizophrenia and psychosis. And as part of my academic travels, encountered people like Mark Soames, who himself has the same kind of bilateral investment, from one point of view, the psychoanalytic, but also the sort of the neuropsychological, the neurobiological basis of how we work and what happens when we don't make sense of our world and don't make the right kinds of decisions. and have since that time enjoyed a very fruitful exchange with Mark on in the context of neuropsychoanalysis, and indeed actually enjoying seeing Mark get more and more into the technical issues of neurophysiology and artificial intelligence and how it relates to natural intelligence.
What about your youth? Is there anything that inspired you when you were younger to continue to move towards the disciplines that you studied?
Lots of experiences, but the main factors were my parents. So my mother was a nurse, and she loved popular psychology. So the house was populated by books on popular psychology. My father was an engineer, specifically a bridge engineer, who was had a passion for physics and maths and engineering, and used to make me read things like Sir Arthur Eddington's Space, Time and Gravitation. So the mixture of the two meant that I had to do the physics of psychology. So most of my career then was trying to position myself in order to study the physics of sentience.
If we could start really broad, actually, with the sentience in existence, I'd like to just start with like our shared ground of being. Here we are in this existence as psychologists, and obviously other disciplines, but, using the mind to learn. Um, and I know consciousness studies is its own field, but when you think of terms of existence, beingness, essence, to be, um, would you say that do you feel connected to that ground of being, and therefore your work sort of is in relation to the beingness or true nature, or I'm not sure which words you would use?
Well, I mean, I think sort of existence and being are perfectly apt. One, I think, could read those on two different levels. So the physics part of my work, which is an attempt to formalize in a way that one can write self-organization of beings that exist down in terms of equations and thereby test well-formed hypotheses about the nature of existence, read simply as systems that self-organize themselves to some characteristic states of being. That would be one way of reading being. Another sort of possibly more interesting from your perspective is the notion or the sense that I exist. So talking about different kinds of selfhood that might underwrite certain forms of consciousness, beyond just qualitative experience, but the qualitative experience of me being myself doing the experiencing. So interestingly, you can start to get from the physics-based account of simply what does it mean to exist, and if I exist in some characteristic states, what kind of processes and what kind of dynamics must I be equipped with, and what would they look like if somebody saw me existing? One can get from that account, which would be the free energy principle, to a much higher level mentalized account of knowing that I am a self and I exist in a world as an embodied brain situated in my social niche, in my cultural niche.
Right. And understanding, and we'll go into your terms here, Markov blanket, free energy principle. But this idea that we, as true nature, as being itself, we can act upon the world as a self-aware being. And perhaps that self-awareness becomes the pivot of everything that we're going to discuss today, or anything, excuse me, that we do in the field of science or any kind of contemplative tradition.
Yeah, I love the word self, and I would look at self-awareness as a very special aspect of certain selves. And perhaps I don't want to use too many words. You're going to force me to explain to a general audience. But if you just think about from the point of view of the physics of selfhood, what is it to be a self as opposed to non-self? And then, of course, one has to ask what separates self from non-self. And you've already mentioned Markov blankets as a sort of the mathematical tool that you bring to the table that enables you to distinguish between self and non-self. And indeed, that blanket, that separation, can almost be definitive of something that is a self. Well, does it know it's a self? Probably not. The vast majority of things probably don't know that they are selves. Certainly lots of inanimate objects would not know that they were a self. So you start to ask yourself, well, what is special about things or selves that self-organize to minimize their self-information in such a way that they now become aware that they are a self? And I think that's at that level. Now you're asking some very deep questions about sort of consciousness read as being self-aware in the sort of metacognitive self-modeling sense.
Yes, and I know you're not a philosopher per se, but all science sits inside of a philosophy. It's either going to be a dualistic philosophy or dual aspect monism, which I believe in one of the papers, perhaps the paper was Soames that I read of yours. It there is a mention of dual aspect monism. Is there? Yes. Do you subscribe to dual aspect monism, or do you sort of dance in and out of different ways of framing consciousness or the foundation of science?
I'm very committed. I'm quite happy with dual aspect monism. Um, but you're also right. I do dance around. So depending on who I'm talking to, if I'm talking to an idealist, I will sort of nurture my arguments to be compliant with that. I'll talk to a realist on the other hand. But if one just stays close to the physics, then I think that dual aspect monism is exactly the right way to think about things. I've been told I'm a transcendental idealist, and I have no idea what it means. But if you want to label me, that's, I think, what I am. If you were talking to a philosopher, but to come back to the dual aspect monism, just technically, that's, I think, a really interesting aspect of the physics of sentience, in the sense that just to exist as a self um, entails a certain synchrony between what goes on inside the thing, say my brain, and the rest of the universe. And that synchrony basically can be read as me having probabilistic beliefs of a mathematical sort, some personal beliefs about everything else, about the outside. And as soon as you read the state of, say, the brain as encoding information or beliefs, again, I repeat, of a subpersonal kind, about something else, you've got a very different kind of information geometry, because you can apply information geometry and mathematics to neuronal dynamics and brain activations. And indeed, much of my work in brain imaging rests upon looking at brain activations in terms of blood flow or electromagnetic signals, which have an information geometry. And that will be the information geometry of the real world, in this instance, the bit of the world that is my brain. At the same time, exactly the same substrate can be read as encoding beliefs about the outside. So I think that from a maths point of view, you have a perfect vehicle to understand how two kinds of belief structures or information theoretic structures supervene on exactly the same thing, which is my embodied brain.
Right. So I don't know if the term synchronicity is valuable here, but the world behind our eyes and the world in front of our eyes, there is a match going on. Now, whether that match is real or true, it really becomes the debate in the mental health space. Are you seeing the world as it is? And I'm going to go into an example real quick, or not. So if we could use, again, through the Freudian lineage, Bowlby, Ainsworth, I love the field of attachment theory. So when children grow up in households where there's insecure attachment and um, perhaps complex trauma through the developmental phases, but not being seen, not being soothed, not feeling safe. So some sort of anxiety develops or an avoidant behavior develops. And then that pattern of behavior tends to follow that person into adulthood. So they start to see other humans through that same pattern with which they began to view the world because of the family of origin. Um, so that's where you're going with that world behind the eyes and world in front of your eyes. Am I correct there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And just to pick up on your use of the word synchronicity, again, there's um, a fundamental role for what's called synchronization um, in terms of me making sense of my world now, but also as a neonate. So technically, it is exactly this synchronization that, that lends power to this dual aspect monism. So this ability for us on the inside to synchronize with what's going on the outside is one way of understanding the sense making, in the sense that now whatever's going on in my head has to have some correlate out there. It has to be synchronized with something going on out there. And in that sense, it represents what's going on out there. So on that view, the whole point of existence is to synchronize in the right kind of way with my sensed world. You've brought us now to one of the most difficult jobs of getting that synchronization right, which is shortly after being born, how on earth do I make sense of this world? Before I've got a sense of self, indeed. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is to work out what kinds of things can I influence, can I act upon, what kinds of things are not under my control, just to carve an oceanic universe in some sensible way in terms of what is locally, proximately influenceable and what is not. And my entire world is going to be that which is provided by my mother, or my carer, my nurturer. So I think your focus on attachment theory is absolutely crucial in the sense that the context and the relationships and the responses to dyadic interactions between an infant and the mother provide the entirety of the evidence at hand that enables me to build a world model, a generative model that enables me to synchronize with this particular world. And if I get that wrong, then, as you say, my world model, my generative model is going to find a fragile, will lend my interactions with the world a fragility simply because I haven't quite got it right, or I haven't learned quite the distinction, for example, between self and other. So, so coming back to the notion of selfhood, notice that in order to understand my world, I have to develop a model of a concept of a representation of my carer or my carers, basically my mother. That's in itself quite remarkable because now I can I have a world model in which other selves exist. And at some point, I might develop the hypothesis, well, perhaps I am like a mother, perhaps I am a self. And suddenly you're now in a position to have a model where you can disambiguate between, did I cause that, or did mother cause that, or did we cause that together? These are really fundamental constructs that are necessary to underwrite an appropriate world model, and specifically a world model that entails selfhood.
Yes, that, again, perhaps that's the Markov blanket there that we're talking about. And I do think definitions are going to be important. And actually, I'm going to put them in the comments as well. So a lot of our viewers who aren't familiar with your work, they'll have some definitions below in the comments. I'm wondering, perhaps even before the self and other, is safe, not safe? Trustworthy, not trustworthy. And this will go into the affective neuroscience perhaps a little bit too, because the limbic system, right, sits on the brainstem, like the animal body that is born to sense danger or perhaps solve for uncertainty and sit in a safe environment to have and know nurturing care and embodied joy. So before that self, not self, and this might be really hard to speak to or maybe very easy for you, is the safe, not safe? Where does that fall in the spectrum of the learning curve or the developmental curve for the whole human system, brainstem into limbic system into cortex? So that developmental phase.
So developmentally, so the safe, non-safe aspect, I think, would be best understood in exactly the way that you're intimating in relation to uncertainty. So just to not know what's going to happen next and not know what I'm going to do next is, I think, the essence of unsafe. Safe is everything becomes predictable. So, technically, in terms of free energy, which you understand just as a measure of surprise, your expected surprise about what's going to happen next is on average minimized. So that's just one technical way of saying that you're always going to be acting in a way to resolve uncertainty. So if unsafe means uncertain, what you can say is that the drive, if you like, the existential drive that comes from free energy principle, just is to resolve uncertainty and thereby elude unsafe situations. And notice, if you express it like that, in resolving uncertainty, that makes a baby quintessentially curious. So in order to resolve uncertainty, she has to actually explore and experiment to learn about the world such that it becomes more predictable. And if it's predictable, that means that it's less uncertain and therefore more safe. And you see that, for example, it is certainly addressed in things like the baby mobile paradigm. Why do we give babies rattles and things, and why are they so engaged in working out, can I cause this rattle to make a noise, or does it do it by itself? This is a beautiful expression of a necessary curiosity in order to resolve uncertainty that, in this sort of generic sense, renders the world much more predictable and safe. And to come back to the sort of insecure and different kinds of attachment, I think that is the root of a failure to develop the right kind of generative models, because the evidence that you receive means that there is no consistency that enables you to reduce the uncertainty about what response am I going to elicit. So, a good parenting on this very simple analysis is basically providing predictable responses that underwrite or enable learning what that everything is in fact secure and predictable, and therefore by definition is safe.
Beautifully said. And if I have the numbers correctly, something like 50% of the population, maybe this is just in the US, I'm not sure, but is insecurely attached. So that is a lot of people that perhaps are walking around on this planet. I laugh, but it's actually not funny, because there's a lack of safety in their system when it comes to human relating, and maybe too much rigidity, then a freeze response, a shutdown, and some kind of, I don't know, shame or terror, or maybe chaos creating through addiction as one tries to tend the wound that was laid in implicit memory, again, long before the cortex was developed. So I think if those numbers are correct, 50% of us are insecure attached, it does seem like it is a conundrum in and of itself for the way our species moves forward. I don't know if you would agree, or what you would have to add to that, or how you see that.
I agree absolutely entirely. And I was wondering whether you were going to take that forward into the world of fake news and our commitment to social media and the like. But just to come back to your more fundamental point, in terms of adding to that, which I think is absolutely a thing, there's something even more pernicious once you have grown into a state where interpersonal interactions, dyadic interactions of most sorts, are associated with insecurity, unsafeness, and unpredictability. The Bayes optimal, the free energy minimizing response, is to avoid those ambiguous situations. In fact, you can write down mathematically ambiguity, and it's something that you act to avoid. The pernicious aspect is that in avoiding these encounters, these opportunities to explore, you are never providing yourself, or you preclude the opportunity to get any evidence that you are wrong and that there are some safe relationships that may be available. So you get this sort of vicious self-constructing cycle where you become withdrawn and isolated, or choose to interact say through social media, in a way that precludes any opportunity for you to revise your model and secure evidence. In fact, well, no, I can feel safe in a particular relationship. So my favorite example would be, say, a very simple kind of agoraphobia, say, or social withdrawal, social phobia, that I find going out there and exposing myself to pro-social interactions always makes me feel a little bit unsafe and uncertain. I don't know what people think of me, how they're reading. I find this fundamentally unpleasant. And therefore, the obvious thing to do is just stay in my house. But if I stay in my house in an isolated situation, then I am never going to get the evidence that, in fact, there are some people that make me feel safe, that make me feel valued, that I can empathize with, I can synchronize with, I can establish some kind of synchronicity, to come back to that notion. And if the world changes and it is now full of benevolent and empathetic people, I will never know that, because I have, by my behavior, become an addict to isolation. So I liked your sort of reference to addiction here, because in many senses, one can look at again, a relatively simple sense, one can look at the pathology of addiction in that it's a kind of behavior that never allows you to explore what would happen if I don't indulge in my addictive patterns of behavior. You just never get the chance to explore. So you're stopping that natural curiosity that is fundamental for good selfhood.
There's so much richness here, but in psychology, we talk about the window of tolerance. Once we discover emotions, sensations that aren't tolerable, what tools of resilience do we have at that edge in order to sit with the uncertainty, in order to move to a new kind of pattern of behavior or a new way to see the world? So it's at that moment where things seem most intolerable that we actually perhaps have the opportunity to update the model or address some of our fear of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, and you introduced another really important word here, which is resilience. Yeah, so I have colleagues who have written very eloquently about this, and they distinguish between different sort of types of responses to a sudden inflation in unsafeness and uncertainty. Say, a new president in town, or you've moved to another city, or you've lost a loved one. So your whole world has changed in some fundamental way, which means there's a lot of new learning to do. For example, I've lost a loved one, and my house is now bereft of, or has no longer the presence of that loved one. And my day-to-day model of my house and my daily life has to change quite fundamentally. So I have to become curious again. I have to become plastic. I have to relearn my new world. In so doing, I'm going to encounter uncertainty. And at some level, some metacognitive level or hierarchical level, I'm now going to learn that for this period of time, during my grieving, for example, my world is uncertain. And I can suitably adjust my representations of that degree of unpredictability and uncertainty, and respond adaptively. And one would respond adaptively by exploring, by learning, updating my model in exactly the way you describe. If I am successful, I can now make my world again predictable. I can get used to living like this. I can get used to living under this regime or under this president or in this city. And my representation or my beliefs about the predictability and uncertainty of this world, its safeness and unsafeness, will now return to normal. There may be some people, though, who do not, and they're rendered persistently and chronically anxious and chronically feeling unsafe simply because they are now not able to represent the fact that they have passed through this grieving process or through this adjustment or learning process. So the different kinds of resilience that we offer in the face of change, I think, can provide a very nice explanation for why some people cope, some people are resilient, and some people are not. And as you're intimating, I think you can reduce it down basically to how we handle the unknown, how we handle unsafe situations that by definition are not predictable.
Yes, and again, there's so much richness here. I'm going to take a little bit of a right turn for a second, because I'm a longtime practitioner of yoga, and in the non-dual traditions, and in those systems of thought, it's almost like you want to meet uncertainty head on. You want to become comfortable with certainty by taking a comfortable seat in yoga itself. So yoga means to yoke, to unite. It's through the contemplative practice that I can meet uncertainty because I'm so certain in this, again, what I term the vertical connection. When I open that chapter, what goes on for you? Does that resonate in any way?
It certainly resonates. And whenever I'm thinking about these aspirations or states of mind, and also from the point of view of therapeutic applications, and I'm thinking here not just of sort of meditative practice, but also assisted meditative practices using things like 5-HT2A receptor agonists that have, I think, a common mechanism of action. And I'm not sure it fits comfortably with this notion of this vertical, but certainly it makes sense to me in terms of all of these practices, whether they are meditative states in which you are attending the sensorium as opposed to working through in your mind what's going to happen next, what am I going to do next, engaging, say, in an ongoing conversation. So you're deliberately reducing what in my world would be known as the precision, your confidence about your constructs of the world. You're reducing it at a very, very high level and reassigning that explanatory power and that precision to sensations. So, I'm not a meditator, but I would imagine that most meditative practices really focus on something which is very peripheral, say breathing or posture, which is something that from a neuroscientific point of view, the lower parts of the brain's hierarchies would be concerned with, the elemental processing. If one sort of invests more precision and more confidence in that low level processing and sense making and belief updating, then by definition, you have dissolved all the high level structures. So you're now flattening the landscape. And I'm referring obliquely here to Robin Carhart Harris's notion of flattening the landscape. Also obliquely, of course, referring to Mark Solmes's notion of felt uncertainty. But if you become masterful or skilled in actually representing your own uncertainty, the inverse of uncertainty being precision, in your own brain at different levels, then I think you can free yourself from all your preconceptions, literally in the way that we are stuck in our ruts, in the way that we go about thinking not about just the present, but also how we feel our way to the future, the narratives that we pursue, the consequences of our behavior, our attitudes, our intentional stances. All of these things we carve out on the basis of experience. Usually they're fairly functional, but of course, if they're not, then they can induce this kind of, a feeling of uncertainty in relation to what I'm going to do and the consequences of my action. If you can dissolve that by flattening the landscape mindfully, well, no, that's the wrong word, isn't it? Because we're not talking about mindfulness, we're talking about meditation. But if you can volitionally flatten that landscape, I think then you're getting very close to this. I wouldn't again. I may be misusing the words, but you're getting close to certainly a non-dual state of being, in the sense that you as subject and object now ceases to have any meaning if you are an agent, and all your high level constructs are about the consequences of you acting as an agent. So if you can flatten that landscape and resolve and smooth away all the normal channels of thought, then implicitly you're removing any self-modeling that requires you to be an agent of your actions, and you can just focus on the sensorium. So that would be the closest I can get if I had to simulate this. Or
Brilliant, because in Patanjali's Yoga Psychology, the second Yoga Sutra, Yoga's Chittavritti Nirodha, the restraint of the modifications of the mind stuff is yoga. So the aim, if you will, to end suffering is to understand the patterns that the human mind is creating, all the rigid stories, for sure, in order to, maybe you would say, flatten the landscape, in Patanjali's term, to let pure consciousness sit inside itself, would be the way Patanjali would say it. And then you have the capacity to use the mind at will, to send it out on the missions that you want to send it out on. So you're sitting comfortably in the body, the sensorium, and then you're going to have more awareness of the affective states or the drives as they arrive, and therefore the mastery to send the cortex or the mind out on the mission. How does that reflect back when I share that with you?
Well, I'll reflect it back to you. Yeah, absolutely. So I literally had in mind a flat Warrington-like landscape. In fact, technically it's a free energy landscape, but the very fact it's flat exactly gives you that latitude. So that's the whole point about sort of dissolving those ruts, those deep canals, those rigid ways of thinking about self, where you direct your mind. So to open up that horizon literally means to have an energy landscape that enables you now to explore in ways that you were not permitting yourself to explore in a sort of, a state of mind that you'd associate with, sort of daily living, or driving a car, or doing whatever we have to do to get through our day.
And, part of the draw to your work, for me and probably for a lot of people also, is the consilience across disciplines. Like, I can sit here and talk to you about yoga psychology, and you can sort of pick up and flow right in, right? You mentioned Robin Carhart Harris, and also the receptors in the brain. You've worked with psychedelics, obviously neuroscience, obviously affective neuroscience, physics, robotics, AI. So the work that you're doing, consilience is the word that comes to mind. It's like it's moving across many, many different disciplines, and which allows these kind of dialogues to go on. And we have this shared sense, again, inside of our existence, in the beingness, to learn how is nature working for the human mind, in the human system, which either is going to code, maybe one way we could say it in a Freudian sense, code in the positive affects or code in the negative affects? Code for well-being or code for suffering?
I like the way you described that. So yeah, when we started, you were encouraging me to tell you about my sort of life trajectory towards this, the academic work that I pursue. And I ended up by saying, yes, I wanted to study the physics of sentience, but that's just the same as a natural science of psychology, of being, of mindfulness. So that natural science is, I think, would encompass all of the specialist applications that you described. One thing which is technically, I think, is important is to pick out on why there is a consilience, is that we're talking about a physics of beliefs. So going back to that sort of dual monism issue we talked about before. So there's a real commitment behind this kind of physics to beliefs that, interestingly, when written down mathematically, have to have the attribute of uncertainty. So if you think about, if you can remember going back to school and sort of probability distributions, bell-shaped probability distributions over some variable, the attributes that a probability distribution has to have include a location and a measure of the spread or the uncertainty. So there's something deeply baked in to this kind of physics that not only enables you to talk about beliefs and psychology, and possibly even your abnormal psychology or and its relationship to pathophysiology, but also its relationship to uncertainty, and by that, of course, how safe we feel. Bringing in now the affective dimension. But we haven't. I didn't quite answer your question about sort of affect and emotions and the role of the limbic system and the like. Is that what you were driving at? Or?
Well, I still want to go in that direction because you brought up curiosity. And of course, through Jaak Panksepp's brilliant body of work, the seeking function, I believe, might be the first that I will probably get the biology of this wrong, but it's sitting in the limbic system in a way that if the brainstem is maybe firing or on fire or in more of a fear space, and we've already touched on this, then one seems to close down, and that seeking function isn't robust. It seeks safety more than it would, the safety, and to really explore the world, to go 4 blocks out, to go, halfway across the world, whatever it would be. So yeah, I would love if you can maybe share more through the lens of affective neuroscience. I don't know if there's a hierarchy, but the way that perhaps the seeking, because you brought out grief. So the distress call, the panic, grief, distress, like these 7 emotional primes that were named through Panksepp's research. The harmony, like if there's low seeking, high grief, or there's the tendency for depression because one isn't exploring or carving enough new novel pathways. So it's almost like the curiosity is an important part of the mammal. And if that curiosity gets stunted, now we're heading towards mental health issues, or again, the suffering component. If we just think in terms of suffering, non-suffering, like there is 2 basic categories there: well-being, suffering.
Yeah. And on that argument or view, then being just is the mitigation of suffering and the resolution of uncertainty. And I think that fits in beautifully with that sort of emphasis on seeking. And if you just look at the sort of the cardinal emotions of this Panksepian formulation, then I suspect you'll find again this dichotomy, different ways of avoiding uncertainty, either by withdrawal and avoidance, freezing behaviors, for example, or on the positive side, an opportunity to explore. And I would say that play is also part of this curiosity. So playing and seeking both, I think, have this fundamental epistemic drive behind them. I could hear you wanted to talk about epistemic trust earlier on as well, and I think that sort of seeking and play, is a way of establishing that epistemic trust, and it's what we're doing now. I think we're both playing and we're seeking, simply because it's safe. So I think that way of carving up emotions, I think is completely understandable in terms of the physics of self-organization that has this quintessential information-seeking, curious aspect, getting to know my world and be able to fit in my world. And of course, my world being largely comprised of other things like me, other people. There is there's a technical issue here, which is interesting, and I'm sort of I'm mindful of conversations with Mark Soames on this issue, but also wanting to engage people like Richard Lane and Ryan Smith, who have taken active inference, which is an application of the free energy principle, and try to understand emotions from the point of view of inference. And one interesting question one might ask is, okay, I've got all these this machinery that houses all the afferents or the inputs to, say, the reticular activating system of ours, Mark Soames, that allows me now to broadcast enabling neuromodulatory transmitters of the kind that activate the receptors that psilocybin would activate, for example. So, things like dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, acetylcholine, all of these really, your lovely phrase, you can be on fire, with the right kind of ignition through this neuromodulation, you can really contextualize, control this precision or attention that we were talking about before. But how do you set that tone? How do you inform what particular pattern of ignition, what particular sort of structure of the fire down in my subcortex or in my periaqueductal brain or my in my midbrain or my amygdala, in my limbic system more generally? How do I contextualize that? How do I choose the right mode of igniting myself or not, or withdrawing? One could argue that you actually need a cortical representation that recognizes you are in this emotional state in order to ignite these systems that encode the felt uncertainty that Mark Soames would talk about. So this brings you to the interesting notion that it may be that the emotions that we talk about and recognize in an explicit fashion are actually hypotheses and part of our self-modeling. They are actually essential for self-modeling in the sense I have to infer that I'm in this emotional state or that emotional state so that I can now do the right ignition to get the right neuromodulatory transmitters in transmitter systems in play in order to balance the different parts of my processing. And that in turn leads you to think, well, okay, what could go wrong with that kind of modeling? Well, I may end up, if I'm not properly, coming back to secure and insecure attachment, it may be that my repertoire of representing me in different emotional states maybe become almost dyslexic or alexithymic in the sense that I may not even have a library or a repertoire or set of emotional states that I can recognize, or if I do, I'm just seeing good or bad. So you can think of somebody who has, a very compromised self-model of the different emotional states that they can occupy, and very limited repertoire of actually having a nuanced response that would then be manifest in terms of being playful or being disgusted or being, engaging in seeking behavior and the like.
That brings up a word for me: optimization. We learn maths in school, we learn history. Should be learning, we be learning more about how our systems work early on in order to optimize the function. should the teachings on the learnings that are out there now, in really carving forward the pathway of human knowledge, self-awareness, should we be bringing them to our little ones sooner in order to optimize systems, the human system?
So are you asking if we should aspire to be better parents? I suspect you're absolutely right. Yes.
The hardest job on the planet. No, but I mean, I was actually meaning in schools. Like, I'm not saying that maths isn't good to learn, but to really learn about mental health, emotional health, the varieties of emotions that are available, to learn about that. And maybe some schools teach it, but I would venture to say they're probably more rare than the mainstream school systems that we have. And would that benefit us to start to bring this knowledge that advanced degrees is bringing forward, to our little ones sooner in a school setting?
Yeah. Or just provide that opportunity for play and seek in this emotional sphere, interpersonal sphere. I don't know, this is a long way outside my comfort zone, but I would imagine that the people who are responsible for strategy in relation to mobile phones in school, this is exactly the arguments that they bring to the table, that having too much social media at hand actually sucks the oxygen out of this theatre of play that you would normally associate with the school playground or the classroom, that enables you to become skilled in terms of recognizing the right context, and recognizing the context that implies I should be in this emotional state or that emotional state, and to regulate and to become to synchronize with others in a graceful and fluid way. So that that requires a lot of very sophisticated learning, but more importantly, it requires the opportunity, the space in which you can actually learn these things. So I repeat, I don't know, but I would imagine that the reason people are worried about sort of the social media and the decline of interpersonal interactions at a young age is, it's one of the reasons why they are concerned about it.
It is such a massive topic. Social media, our devices, the creation of culture, because we started with the ground of being safety through the initial caregivers. But then we have the cultural dance, which adds another element of mirroring and modeling. And you also brought up a little bit earlier, fake news, or there can be a very performative nature to social media. Those dopamine hits. Am I getting the likes? Am I getting the approvals? It's a lot of external seeking and validation. It's also a meta world. It's not, we're on the internet, so I have all the appreciation in the world for tech, but like any tool, we want to use it in balance, right? If, you have a hammer, you don't want everything to be a nail. We want to be able to use the tech in a way that serves us, not collapses human society. So there's a couple things coming forward for me. I would love to hear your point of view on fake news or our devices in the sense of, how it grabs us either at that fear of uncertainty, the attempt to minimize uncertainty, any of the patterns that we build, we predict, we infer. And then the other component to that, and I'm handing a lot at once, but is nature in the natural world. Like, the example I use a lot is back when we had pounds, like when you could hold a dollar bill or a pound. Now it's all, digital currency mostly, but we would cut down a tree to make that currency when the very thing that had the value for us to live is the tree. So we can pass back and forth the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. So we sort of make this abstract value, as we also do with our phones. They're priced probably 500 times over the value of what it actually costs to make them. It's all marketing. So we have a lot of abstract value going on in our culture. And when it comes to predictive coding or like inferring and certainty, like the fact of the matter is we need clean water and we need trees in order to continue to survive. So this is a cultural question, and I've really sort of like an elastic really expanded the question. But in both those terms, the environment and also the tech media, how would you respond, or how are you feeling about those aspects?
I share your implicit concern. And you brought up so many things there. You know, the whole notion of money in itself is a beautiful aspect of cultural niche construction and sort of, but just drilling down on the specific dangers of social media and the like button. In fact, I've just had an email today from Martin Reed saying his book on the like button is about to be published, and the power of the like button. I would look at that, and certainly your question really foregrounded that for me. That if you are using social media to get more followers or to get more likes, then you have fell victim to the same kind of tech that would encourage you to gamble. You've become an addict. And how would that factor into this physics of sentience? I think in a really simple and quite fundamental way. But to explain that, I just need to rehearse one key point. If one looks at the maths of the things that we choose to do, if we exist in some characteristic states, coming back to the physics of existence, then you can derive the most likely thing I am going to do has two motivations. It's literally the sum of two things. Technically, it's the sum of the expected information gain, which is the play seeking curiosity part, and then an expected utility. So the probability that I will choose to do this is going to be effectively proportional to the expected information gain plus the expected value or utility, where the value of the utility is the probability that this outcome would happen to something like me. Now, the two are in competition, which means that if you overemphasize the liking and the utility of seeking or choosing to behave in a way to solicit more followers or more likes, you are necessarily reducing the contribution of those epistemic motivations, those intrinsic motivations in neurobotics, exactly the motivations that underwrite most of good emotional behavior that is seeking and playful, simply because you have subverted the epistemic motivation and the opportunity to establish some epistemic trust, so you can indulge in that epistemic motivation in the service of this pragmatic kind of value that would be the expected utility or the negative expected cost if you're doing Bayesian decision theory. So I think most of the use of social media of that kind is pathological, and is exactly the same pathology you see in whether it's the fentanyl crisis or whether it's the gambling crisis. It's just exactly the same kind of pathology, and you can understand why people do it. And from a sort of the person's point of view, they are engaging in exactly the right kind of behaviour that underwrites their selfhood. It's just that they've precluded any exploration or any epistemics from the way that they interact with the world. Just come back to your observation. We are actually using electronic media to do this, but we are doing it to actually exercise our intrinsic motivation to explore and to play. And so we can certainly use media to explore for information and to go. And that's the wonderful thing about from Wikipedia through to the news at 10. But when it's used just to fulfill some prior belief, I am the sort of person that has lots of followers and will elicit lots of likes. That that I think is dangerous and not sustainable. It can't be sustainable.
The image that I get is, again, it's more like an embodied, sentient. You keep using the word epistemic, but it's a very embodied and relational move to explore and learn the world. And when it's done in this sort of meta, sort of outside myself way, yeah, now I'm outside myself. Now I'm in this cloud of knowing, or a cloud of being, but my feet quite literally aren't on the ground, or I'm not sort of sitting inside my solar plexus or my gut. I'm up in a sphere of thought construction, um, of an appearance of what followers looks like, or likes looks like, or again, performative. And I would agree with you. It can't help but collapse because it isn't true nature. It's a business model created by corporations to grab our attention, right? And yeah, that action perception cycle. If that's the I think of sort of kittens, and you put a like pink ball by them, and it's going to grab their attention. And today, with the way that our devices, our handheld devices in particular, I think are devised for those dopamine hits or the likes, it's just this constant grab for attention, which puts our attention again in that cloud world and takes it away from the hike, or doing a yoga practice, or something that's actually very embodied.
Yes, yes. And I think you could extend that argument in a really useful way. That, by the way, I like your notion of this, being performant. It's all about the sort of the consequences of performing, as opposed to the epistemics. And one particular, I think, expression of pursuing and trying to establish some epistemic trust that comes hand in hand with this synchronicity is the way that two people synchronize and engage. And of course, to do that, to communicate truly, and to resolve the hermeneutic problem of what do you mean, what is your intention, what is your intentional stance, I need more than just your written word. We could be conversing on email, but this is a much more efficient way for us to synchronize, to attain that kind of synchronicity, that sort of elemental empathy, simply because I can look at your facial expressions, simply because I can infer, not just given the verbal cues or your vote. I can infer your state of mind based upon my likely state of mind, as if I was you. So that does require some interpersonal exchange. And you could take that even further. If you could put a affinitive touch in play, then physical contact would provide further embodied evidence, or evidence from your body and evidence from my body, that would underwrite this kind of synchronization that is necessary to resolve our mutual uncertainty about each other, and literally sing from the same hymn sheet and understand each other in some deep sense. You can't get that from from chasing likes on an iPhone. It's just not that kind of that. It doesn't have that. It does not provide the opportunity for resolving uncertainty in the moment by reaching out to somebody else and trying to see things through their eyes and resonating, riffing in a way that renders the world safe again, or this little world, this little social communicative world, safe and predictable, such that we can agree with each other and then move on to the next argument.
Yeah, and maybe just to distill that, the takeaway is make sure, as we continue to develop these products, that we use them, they don't use us. That we really have the right frame to make sure that, again, it goes back to that mastery idea, that we have it, it doesn't have us. we explore parapsychological phenomena a lot on our channel. I don't know how familiar you are with that kind of phenomena, but with the free energy principle and all the research that you do you see the possibility of a world model that's actually very different than whether we would call it the dualistic, pauper, falsifiable, like where these phenomena might pop through in certain segments of the population, like telepathy, perhaps in the autistic savants, or I don't know if you know the work of Jeff Kripal at Rice University in Texas. He researches parapsychological phenomena as well. And again, they just tend to pop through, actually, interestingly, a lot of times with people who have traumatic backgrounds. Just in general, do you have any interest in phenomena like that? Or do you see how our worldview as a species could get updated with that kind of phenomena?
I think my approach to that, to parapsychology, would be to try and find the place in the physics of sentience that would make sense of that. And I think that would be fairly easy to do. And I think it all comes back to your the synchronicity we were talking about. So just if I were to unpack that, from the point of view of the free energy principle, we are all, if you like, behind our Markov blanket, within our Markov blanket, and we will never see beyond that. All we can do is infer the causes of what the impressions upon our blanket or our sensorium. If you were Chris Fields, a quantum information theorist, it would be a holographic screen. So, my universe from the inside is unknowable. However, I can make an inference that there in that universe are other things like me, and if I can infer that there are other things like me, then and I do so successfully mathematically, thereby establishing some synchronization. The very existence of that synchronization, and just for your interest, I mean, this has a mathematical basis. It's called synchronization of chaos or generalized synchronization. That means that there is now a lawful mathematical mapping between your brain state and, by this dual aspect monism, your mind state and my mind state. So the free energy principle is really trying to explain that lawful mapping, which you could regard as a parapsychology, in the sense that it is side by side psychology written as neuronal dynamics with this intrinsic information geometry that encodes beliefs about something, but in this instance it's the other person, which would be the second aspect of this belief updating or Bayesian mechanics. That is one way of reading this generalized synchrony. So mathematically, if you will allow me to talk about parapsychological events as simply expressions of synchronization of chaos between two minds, then yes, absolutely, no problem. You should be able to write that down mathematically. You should indeed be able to simulate it.
It's very encouraging for me to hear, like, yes, my math works for this. So that's wonderful. Well, we have had a wide-ranging conversation, and I know it's getting late where you are. Is there anything that you feel, in addition, that you'd like to share? Anything maybe about the updating of Freud's project for scientific psychology? We could probably do a whole sort of separate episode even on that. But yeah, any final words?
Now, there's too much. We haven't done epistemic trust properly, but I would like to just come back to Mark Soames, because I was privileged to attend a workshop, a symposium, where he was where they were actually releasing the next edition of the standard edition. And it was a beautiful occasion. And I just didn't realize that Mark himself and all the team around him have spent so many decades of their lives carefully putting together and reevaluating and being sensitive to all the different perspectives. It was an amazing experience, because I only know Mark from conversations like this and neuropsychoanalysis. So it was a beautiful occasion, and again, to use your word, a nice consilience of our investment in understanding ourselves in a collective sense. What would I want to say? I'd like to say thank you. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, Karl, and your work is so fascinating and interesting and right on point for the time that we're living in, I feel. So yeah, thank you so much for coming and joining us here today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for those of you watching or listening. Thank you for being with us. You're the reason that we're here in community, exploring our common unity. You are warmly invited to visit transformationandintegration.com to access additional resources that support the journey through deep transformation, and to learn more about the ongoing offerings at Center for Transformation and Integration, including our certified training in transformational coaching with an emphasis in somatic integration therapy. I look forward to welcoming you there.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.